Hi there, welcome back to the podcast of Wednesday's Child. You're with your host, Debbie Watson. I am the founder of Wednesday's Child, and today I am joined by a special guest on the podcast show. So I'm joined by Isabel Leming, who is an incredible therapist who I have come to know professionally and personally, and I have huge respect and admiration for. And I just was really excited about the opportunity to share with you that Isabel is now joining our team as one of our Wednesday's Child practitioners. So some of you listening to this may in the coming weeks and months get to actually communicate with Isabel on your own personal level, but also I just think there's so much to learn in an episode today from Isabel about the access to therapy these days and how we should go about that, how we should perceive therapy now compared with how we might have done years previously, and also look at the many different types of therapeutic approaches that Isabel has been part of in her career. And I think just so much to learn from her. So join me in welcoming Isabel Leming. Hi.
Hello.
How are you doing? You all right?
Yeah, I'm really good. Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Oh, you're more than welcome. Now, Isabel, you're based up in Glasgow, aren't you?
Yes, I am. I'm in Scotland. I've lived in Edinburgh before. I'm now in Glasgow.
And you hail from the wonderful world of East Anglia, which is where I am too.
I do indeed. I'm from Suffolk and my parents still live there, so I love going back.
And in terms of therapy delivery, I guess, like so many of us post-COVID, lots of your work is online. So you must see people the full length and breadth of the country and probably even beyond.
Yeah, absolutely. I do still do a mix, so a bit of both. I see people in person and in the clinic, but absolutely the majority of people are online. And probably also the majority are actually down south at the moment for me. So yeah, clients in Scotland and England.
Amazing, excellent. Now, what really fascinates me, you've gone down the route of sort of mental health therapeutic kind of practice, but you're certainly not what I would call a one-trick pony. You are very much kind of, you straddle lots of different strands of therapeutic support. Do you want to talk me through where you see yourself? Do you talk about yourself as an integrative therapist? Where do you position yourself, and how does that set you apart from any other kind of specialist?
Yeah, I do see myself as an integrative therapist, and that is how I would describe myself. So I use a range of different modalities, and I'm a firm believer that there's not just one approach for everyone. I think even if something works particularly well for people, there can always be other strings from other areas that we can also draw on to further help people. So there's a range of different things that I do. One of them is neuro-linguistic programming, which was actually my first introduction into the thought of coaching and therapeutic world. And that was something I did about university time. And I loved it. And I saw how quick and how impactful it can be for people. And it was sort of since I did that I then began exploring other areas and different ways to help people.
So I know a lot of people in this community who've experienced an eating disorder will have heard of NLP, and some people will have used it and to great effect. Tell me how you think it kind of, what are the greatest benefits for those that do choose to go down the route of NLP? What do most people gain from going down the NLP route?
I think a couple of things. I think one of the first thing is it helps to resource people. So I think it can give people an insight into actually there is an element of control there. And some of it is a case of seeing not only what's within yourself, but what you can see from the people around you. So from modeling behaviors and things like that as well. And taking approaches, well, not necessarily an approach, but yeah, seeing what works for other people and how you can apply that, but also resourcing yourself through a range of different methods, whatever it might be that works for you. But I think what it can do is it can help to give people an understanding of how their brain works, and also how they can then use that new understanding that they've gained about how their brain works to implement specific strategies for themselves. But obviously that would be something that we would facilitate with them.
I think what I see as so kind of powerful about it is it feels very practical. Like you say, it's very resource driven. It is like saying, so here's my toolkit, here's what I'm able to do.
Yeah.
I think the thing many people fear about when they hear the word therapy or counselling or whatever, what they fear is, oh, you mean I'm going to sit in a room and I'm going to go over and over and over my history. I'm just going to talk about the bad, the negative, everything that's gone before. Whereas NLP isn't about that. NLP is about awareness of where I am and looking at what I can pack my toolkit with today to embrace the life I want for the future.
Absolutely. And I actually think that's something that's true for all of the modalities that I use. They're all very, what they often call in the area is like solution focused. So you're looking for that solution. It's not, as some of the approaches are, more sort of focusing on potentially what the issue is. It's okay. We know what the issue is. Where do you want to get to? And what do you want out of this? How do you know that that's going to be the outcome? So what's going to be different once you're, whatever it might be, once you're experiencing less anxiety? How are you going to know that? What will that look like? So definitely.
I've talked about on this podcast before about saying it's less about what's the matter with you and more about what matters to you. So kind of what is your aspiration? What is your ambition? So how we can move you forward.
Yeah, and I think just another point to touch on from what you said about giving people like a toolbox and a set of tools. I think that's probably some of the feedback that I've had most from my clients. It's been, well, the thing that's so great about the work that you do is that you're giving me, I've used the word already, but solutions, and you're giving me practical things to go away with, and also things that I can do by myself if I want to once our sessions have finished. So it's more than a case of talking through the issues. It's, as I say, that next step as well was, well, what can we do and what can you also do to help yourself?
So is there almost like a non-existent contract that exists between the therapist and the person coming to you that is kind of, you need to be prepared to show up and attend these sessions, but also that you need to be prepared to do the homework. You need to do the doing. There's no point in having these weekly sessions that last 45 minutes and you go away and in those 7 days you do absolutely nothing to change the way you think or live.
Yeah, definitely. I think it is an unwritten thing, but what I would also say is, for me personally, I do put some emphasis on it at the start. So I will say to people, look, this isn't just about coming to have these conversations and have these sessions. It's about more than that. And I am expecting you to put into practice some of the things that we talk about. And when you do that, that's when you'll begin to see the improvements and you'll begin to see the benefits. But, there's also that side of, it will be difficult. And I'm here to support you through that as well in whatever way is best for you.
So I'm interested to know, how do you know when somebody approaches you for what they think is the kind of the starting point of their journey? Is there ever a time when you look at somebody and you have that initial conversation and you think they're just not ready? Is that really tricky for you? Because somebody might be coming to you at a point of desperation, or dare I say it, effectively being dragged by somebody else who thinks that they're in need of support. How do we deal with that? How do you kind of say to someone, you're just not ready?
Yeah, it is probably one of the most difficult conversations to be had, and it has happened in the past. I think there's a couple of things to it. I think it's about getting them to see and understand from a therapist's point of view or as a practitioner what the reasons are behind it. So is it because potentially so sometimes it could even be that there's almost too much going on. So they might have so many things going on, even like court cases and things like that. And you sort of intuitively know that they're not going to be able necessarily to implement some of the practices because of where they are with things in their life. So you have to sort of slowly start bringing them around, and you'll give them some initial tips to say, this is what you could go away and do now. When things have settled down a little bit and you're ready to start talking about things in a bit more detail. Detail's maybe not the right word, but to start putting more focus on what we can do, then that's it. But other times it might be, for me, the people who they potentially want more of a support in terms of they want to focus on what's wrong. And it might be a session or two where you're saying, okay, well, let's look at the other side of this. What is it that you want? And sometimes that can take a little bit of time, and it's again just that support through that. But for some people, they'll say, well, actually, maybe I'm not ready for this. So it's okay when you're ready to start making some changes, then come back and we can look at how to implement these things.
It's kind of facilitating their own self-awareness of where they are.
Yes. Yeah.
And then being honest with themselves that actually maybe it was my husband that wanted me to be here, or my parent that wanted me to be here, and less about being ready to show up for it right now.
Yeah. And to be honest, there are some people that will say that straight away. They'll just straight away say, look, I don't necessarily want to be here. My husband wants, or whoever wants me to be here. And so you'll sort of, speak a bit more and say, okay, well, would it be beneficial for you? Is it something you actually are ready to work at? Take it from there.
And how easy is it, and do you encourage it to go from one type of therapy to another? Can you seamlessly move from some? I know some people will talk about perhaps they've been on, like, I don't know, kind of through the route of CBT, and then they might move into something more intensive. Do you see that happening as a pathway for some people? And particularly, I'm thinking about, like, with eating disorders, often people maybe have historically had some form of therapy, and then they want to come back into therapy later in their life because the eating disorder is still sat there, but they want to try a different approach, or they've been to the same therapist for a long time, but then they realize, hold on, this hasn't been working, I need to shift this because I'm changing or my need is changing.
Definitely. I think it's actually something that I've seen quite a lot throughout my work within the mental health field. So people in particular, I think typically because they're more traditional approaches, which means that more people have tried them. Counselling probably the main one, where people will say, actually, it may have been helpful at the time, but it wasn't as helpful as I would want it to be now, and maybe I'm ready to try something else. But I definitely think, there's room to try other things. And I think I sort of touched on it at the start that I think actually from where my own mindset sits with it is there is actually room for all of these therapies. And I think it's about taking bits from each of them for different situations, and okay, which tool from this modality is going to work particularly well for this. So I guess I'm talking about it more from a practitioner's point of view there. But I definitely think it would be possible and not too difficult at all for people to go between modalities.
And I think for anybody listening who isn't even sure what the various modalities are, I would encourage them to explore those. And there's one mark of a good therapist is somebody who's prepared to talk to you about all those opportunities, because I would never have thought I would have been somebody that would have got my head around, like, the tapping. I found that kind of a really unusual thing for me. This seems a bit weird. But even now, when I'm trying to kind of calm myself, I can, just in a snapshot, I can see something that has the power. I don't call on it all the time, but there's something I've gained from that, having learnt it many, many years ago. I don't know why, but it seemed to work for me. That's just one of your other kind of modalities that you use, isn't it? EFT.
Yeah, EFT, definitely. It's one that I actually use quite a lot. And I find it very effective. But funny enough, I had the same experience as you. I first tried it when I must have been a teenager. Can't remember exactly how old. And I found it a bit weird. Wasn't really sure about it at all. Felt quite uncomfortable when I was doing it. Perhaps
you feel a bit self-conscious, don't you? So just explain to people, this is where someone would say to you, now tap at this point on perhaps your forehead or kind of, your cheek or whatever.
So it's essentially you tap on different what's called acupressure points, or pressure points within the body, to release energy and release flow, release the negative emotions, negative energy, get you feeling a bit more relaxed. But you can do it in a way where you tap on different points for different feelings, for example, but also things like collarbone points, which are just below your collarbone. They're great when people are heavily emotional and maybe they've got particularly upset about whatever we're talking about, or you might be in a state of panic or overwhelm. There's particular points that can be more effective for those types of instances. But it can be uncomfortable, I think, because we're not used to tapping on our body. First of all, it comes more from that sort of Chinese medicine. But also what it forces people to do is initially acknowledge what the problem is. And that is something that can be difficult to do, but it's what makes it so powerful, because also we're saying these things out loud. And by all means, you don't have to say them out loud. With some people who are more nervous or perhaps uncomfortable, initially I might say, okay, well, we can say it in our heads. And then as they begin to get more comfortable, that's then we'll begin to build up a bit more. But it's very powerful because there's a few different things that it forces you to do, which ordinarily we don't do. And even just saying the things out loud, like I'm feeling really anxious, just as a really simple example, people go, oh, okay. Or you're just accepting the fact, okay, I've been feeling really stressed, but that's okay. I think that in itself is a hugely powerful thing.
It's that kind of repetition of verbalizing it. And I think sometimes people who've gone through issues with an eating disorder, aren't very good at verbalizing. Like, so sometimes we have that kind of, just, I don't know, choking feeling of not being able to communicate what we're feeling. But I think the other thing that worked for me, perhaps, and it's just my own reflections on it, I wasn't good at self-touch. So then to be asked to do a therapy that actually asks me to engage with my human self and to touch the physical being, that in itself could almost create really powerful emotions. Which then almost it's harder work to do, but actually once it becomes something that you see the benefits of, it's very easy. I could sit in my car and do it, not when I'm driving. But or just it used to be something that I would resort to. Say, for example, I just pulled up outside a restaurant, about to go and meet a group of friends, getting a little bit anxious about public eating, but this is what will calm me. Whereas normally prior to that, it might have been a state of a complete distress, choking, crying, refusing to go into the restaurant, turn the engine back on and drive home. Instead, I can calm myself in that moment, and actually, that couple of minutes of almost like mantra-like talking is really, really helpful.
And I think with EFT or tapping is it's good for that, because it almost works in two ways. You can use it in, as we say, the example that you've given, more in the short term, so it can help you overcome initially. And I'm sure it could be the same with things like food craving or controlling the food in whichever way that might be for the person, to get through that initial fear or anxiety, whatever the feeling would be. But there was someone I was speaking to actually just this week who I've done some tapping with her, and she was out at a basketball game with her friend, and she started getting anxious. And because some of the points are on your hands and your fingers, she was able to sit there, and even whilst she was sitting next to someone, she was sort of tapping on her hands, whilst sort of talking to herself in her head. And that for her was enough to help her through that moment and bring her back to the present moment, back to the basketball game.
That's really interesting. So it doesn't even need to feel like it's hugely public or whatever. It's really subtle.
Not at all.
And you can be in that moment. But then the point is, it brings you back to present, as you say. It brings you back to the room.
And
it feels to me that particular type of therapy is one that, and for any adults listening that have younger people they live with who have eating disorder issues, it feels like to me like a type of practice that can be very easily worked with younger people. Do you think?
Yes, definitely. I do think that. I think, one, because it's relatively easy, it's relatively simple, but I think it can help younger people probably for similar reasons that we've spoken about. But as I say, even if they're feeling a bit insecure and uncomfortable and they don't want to say it out loud, actually they can just think about it and tap along with you. And that really is, it's still effective for children. It's I mean, my mum was worked in education for a long time, and she used it a lot in schools with children, to huge effect and huge benefit.
That's very interesting. So now let's go to the complete other extreme. You've also worked in therapies that some people just won't know anything about at all. Tell me about RTMS and tell me what it is. And I mean, we haven't got any kind of pictures showing up on screen now, so you're going to have to kind of explain this quite kind of visually as possible to do over an audio podcast. Tell me how you came into that and why you think that works as powerfully as it does for some people.
Yeah, so RTMS, it stands for repetitive transcranial magnetic stimulation. So I guess let's just break that word down, and hopefully that will help visually as well. So transcranial, so cranial is the head, magnetic, so it uses magnetic energy, magnetic pulses, which are sent through from a magnetic field that's generated around a coil to a specific area of the brain. So the coil will be placed over a different area of the head, depending on what was being treated, and the pulses would be sent at different frequencies, so different speeds, essentially, based on what effects you want to have in the brain. So how did I first get into it? Well, I first learned about it actually at university. I did a master's in neuroscience, and it was part of one of my research projects that I did for that. Following that, I sort of was when I first got into working to support people with mental health. It was first I was off in a hospital, but then I ended up working with a company who were one of the first companies to actually use TMS within the UK. And we had a clinic in London, and yeah, I was the practitioner that worked there, so I helped to provide the treatment, support the patients as they were having the treatment. Yeah, that's a very quick introduction. I know.
It sounds
yeah.
very practical, and I know when I've sort of in the past I've mentioned, because I know of you, and I've talked to people about what you do, and I get people saying, "Oh, you mean the thing that they used to give people electric shock therapy?" And people panic that that's what it means. It's that kind of really complicated thing. Just to reassure people, it's not at all like that.
No, not at all like that. It is much less invasive. So with the RTMS magnetic, as I say, one of the key distinctions is that it's just magnetic pulses as opposed to electric currents and electric shocks to the brain. So with ECT, it causes a seizure, and it's done under anesthetic, and you might stay in hospital and things like that. With RTMS, you come in, you don't have to be under any anesthetic. You're literally sat in a chair. You're talking to the practitioner the whole time, and the pulses are sent. You can feel them if you're having the treatment. So you can feel them. People describe it in completely different ways. Some people say it's like a bird tapping the head. Some people say it's a bit like if someone was like lightly flicking a rubber band at you. But it's that sort of repetitive, like touching. Some people say like if someone was to hit you with a pen like that. Yeah, so there's a few differences between them. RTMS, bit different, still effective, but I guess in a similar vein to ECT, at the moment it is more traditionally used for people who are what they call within that healthcare sector as treatment resistant. I think they use a new word for it now, but it's essentially that. So people who haven't yet benefited from things like medication, or often traditionally CBT and counselling as well.
So they might
at the moment
and have had a long period
of
medication, but for whatever reason it's just not working for them.
Yeah, exactly. And they're typically the people who would go on to have this RTMS treatment. I do think that will change in the years to come. I think that there's the evidence for how effective it is still growing. So we know that it's effective for treatment resistant people, and I think once we can use it more and more and more, it's being used more within the NHS in England at the moment. It will become more, hopefully, towards more of a first line treatment, as opposed to just more traditionally, as I say, being used for people who have tried other treatments and therapies.
Okay. So let's just talk about the perception of therapy. Like, you know, I know back in the day, sitcoms in the 1980s, it was kind of seen as a wacky thing if somebody was going to go and see a counsellor, a therapist. Where are we at in 2022 when somebody decides to engage with some kind of support for their mental health? And, you know, naturally, as a practitioner, you're going to say, well, there is no kind of stigma or anything. But do you think we've come such a long way that it is seen as that much more acceptable and therefore open to all? And do you think the door is open as much as it should be?
I think it's definitely improved for sure. But I can still see a generational difference. So I actually was with a client yesterday who is early 20s, and she was describing to me her parent, who is still sort of, would call them mental health, someone who wanted mental health support. He would still call it a nervous breakdown, and he would almost refuse to accept that people might be struggling with mental health and that they could go for support and, you know, try different things to help them. And it wasn't something that he would even have considered, essentially, was what she was saying. Is it's not something that, yeah, he wouldn't even consider. So I do think there's still that generational gap. Not, of course, for everyone. I think in general it has gotten better, but I would say that the generational gap is there. I would say about younger people, they are more open to it. And I think they're more open to it in a more positive way, because I think a lot of people not only see it as a benefit for their mental health, but also self-development in general. So they'll know, for example, if they're in business, I'm starting to get more people who think, well, actually, therapy can help me perform at my highest. So I'm not necessarily in a particularly bad place right now, but I'm not where I want to be. I could be doing better mentally. And I know that if I'm doing better mentally, then that will push my business or push my work life, whatever it might be, to be even better. I still think there's apprehension. I do actually still believe I do think there's still some stigma there. But it's definitely changing, and hopefully it will continue to change in the right direction.
Yeah, and certainly I still believe, you know, when we deliver training about eating disorders, I still believe it's the situation, particularly if we go into corporates and we talk to businesses about, you know, what do you need to understand about eating disorders. I still know there's that resistance to talking about an illness that's a mental illness, as opposed to if we were a type of organization that went in to talk about childhood cancer or, you know, kind of breast cancer or something like that. I'm not saying one is more or less of a priority, but certainly there still seems some degree of barrier and reluctance to talk about issues related to mental health rather than physical health.
Yeah, I think the same. I think barrier was actually the exact word that I was thinking of as you were talking there. There does still seem to be some sort of barrier between people. I think it's because it makes them feel uncomfortable. It makes them feel uncomfortable and they're not really sure about it, and they don't know what to do. They don't know what to do and they don't know what to say, particularly for people who haven't experienced any sort of mental ill health or mental illness. They just can't get their head around it, and that makes them feel uncomfortable, which in a way is sort of understandable. But there needs to be, okay, that's when their own regulation, I think, comes into it. Okay, I'm feeling uncomfortable, but actually, how can I change my behavior now in a way that's going to help my team or the people around me or my family, who, you know, whoever it might be. So yeah, it's definitely still there for sure. I think particularly with businesses, they're just not sure about it all, for probably many reasons.
And the truth is, we know from statistics, I mean, I don't know if you know off the top of your head, like if we looked at an average workplace, what the percentage of people experiencing mental health at any one time in a company might be. But surely we must be able to say that most employers at any one time will have at least one person, even in a very small SME organization, who is battling some kind of mental health issue, or as in the case we see with a lot of our families, even if it's not the employee themselves, they may have a family member at home who is a young person battling something like an eating disorder.
Yeah, definitely. There's lots to it. I think there's more and more research coming out, in particular with regards to the workplace. And there was actually one study I saw yesterday, which was a bit more of an extreme version of it, but it was saying how people who worked really, really long hours, so it was like 90 plus work weeks, which is obviously, you know, a lot of work. They were the symptoms they had for depression were 3 times as much as someone who works a 40-hour week. And there's a lot of statistics and things like that coming out at the moment, particularly in relation to things like burnout as well. But yeah, I think the signs as well of things like eating disorders, because people aren't educated on it. I think it's something that really needs to come into the school system a bit more from a young age, because these people aren't educated. They don't know the signs, and as I say again, they sort of panic and they don't know what to do about it. So instead of doing something about it, they just sort of like brush it off and think they'll be okay because they don't know what to do, and they panic, and that's it. Then they just leave it.
It's really difficult conversations to have, and isn't there?
Yeah.
And one of the first things we find with the biggest thing that in training in schools that teachers or school nurses want to take away from this is, how do I have that conversation when I think I've spotted something? And how do I have that conversation with the parent when I think I need to explain to them, we're concerned about your child, but we're not pointing the finger and trying to kind of issue any guilt in your direction. And I think in some cases, and I'm not blaming every school for this, but I think in some cases it's almost felt easier to say nothing and to think it can't really be that bad. It's probably a faddy episode that young person is going through. And as I know only too well, but for something like an eating disorder, early intervention is everything. So we can't risk that 5 years of the school going by without
just
saying something. So it's the more we can kind of bang that drum and get the education in schools, the better. So
it's, as you say, it's not only the education on the actual sort of mental health, whether it's eating disorders, but it's also, I think it's what you sort of pinpointed, it's the communication, because it's that vulnerability, and it's people who they just don't know what to say and how to say it. And I've had quite a few people come to me recently and say, this is what I want some help with, is, I struggle with, even if it's giving feedback, and they just feel worried about it to the point where they just don't do it. So I think there's two parts to that. It's the education about the actual illness and spotting the signs and the symptoms, and then here's a good way to have a positive outcome for your conversation with, in a difficult circumstance.
So overcoming that communication paralysis, which could just as easily be with a business leader and his employee, but it could also be with a parent and their teenager, or an adult and their spouse that they're concerned about. It's how do we have those communications without it eating away at us and kind of making that person worse and the whole kind of environment, be it the business environment or the family environment.
And as you said, not just avoiding it will then end up that child, just as that's the example we used, then they have 5 years of going through that school with that issue being ignored, and what does that lead to, and what also does that teach them going forward?
And what missed opportunity, what sort of desperate situation it is when you're missing out the potential for that young person to flourish in the way that they ought to be able to. So for anybody that's listening to this, what sorts of things, if whether they're an individual going to think about therapy for the first time themselves, or a family member that's thinking, this is my next step, really, is to try and get some support for someone I love, what are the kind of things that they ought to be looking for, questions they ought to be asking of themselves? Are there particular things that you think they should be thinking about in order to make sure they pick the right modality and the right practitioner? I'm a big believer in, you could deliver the best modality in the world, but actually if you're not the right fit for me and I can't feel comfortable expressing myself, that's never going to work, is it? It's a relationship thing.
Absolutely. I think the number one thing is definitely the actual practitioner, and that almost reports, do I feel comfortable with this person? Can I trust them with, all these quite difficult things that I'm going to talk about and might end up being brought up? Do I feel comfortable with this person? I think that is the first thing. So always have a call initially. I think most therapists would do that anyway, but always have a call and think about not what they're telling you, but how they're making you feel. Do you feel comfortable in that conversation? And if you're not sure, then go back and have another call. That would be okay. You don't need to decide anything straight away if you're not sure. Take some time to think about it. If there are specific modalities that you're interested in, then of course go and research them and ask the practitioner about that. Sometimes there may be different modalities for different things. As I say, different things may work in individual cases or for even particular parts of what that individual wants to improve on or get away from. So I think, yeah, you said it straight away. The biggest thing for me is absolutely, do you feel comfortable with that person? And that's really the biggest decider, I would say.
And you would say then, therefore, as a therapist, you're never going to feel insulted if someone just says to you, you're just not the right person for
Not at all. No, and it has to be right. It has to be right both ways. But absolutely, of course, for that, the client that's coming in as well, the person that wants support. Because ultimately, for you to get the best out of it, you need to feel comfortable and able to express these things, and also willing to, I think, talk to that person. But they, it's also comfortable with the process as well. And if you feel more comfortable with the person, then something that sometimes can be difficult but is very rewarding, the process will be easier if you're getting on well with that person that you're working with. And you feel safe. Safety is a big one.
Yeah, I think it can become very quickly apparent, can't it? It doesn't need to be something where you need to say to yourself, oh, maybe I should give it 16 sessions before I figure out what's right for me.
Yeah. And if you know that they're not right, or you suddenly think, actually, I'm not sure about this, don't, it's okay. You can say, actually, this isn't working for me, and look for someone else or something else if it's something else that you prefer, and that will be respected.
It's not that sticky conversation that we have to have at the end of relationships where we end up saying, it's not me, it's not you. I guess as a practitioner, you're always prepared for those exit points.
Yeah, you have to be, I think. And it's also about, I think from a practitioner's point of view, again, it's about letting them know that, and, understanding that then it might not be right for them, and that's okay, and yeah, again, they just need to feel that it's okay to choose potentially someone else or to go somewhere else. So yeah, look for different people, see what you think might work, and take it from there.
Thank you, Isabel, that's really helpful. What a great insight. So we've learned a fair bit about kind of your skills and specialism, your background in therapy, but also some fabulous tips for how to engage or why to engage and when not to engage with your own kind of therapeutic journey. So I just want to kind of warmly welcome you to the Wednesday's Child community and say we're really glad to have you on as a practitioner. And I know that you're primed and ready to start receiving people to support. So really looking forward to getting some positive feedback and hopefully people telling us of some great experience they're having with you in their sessions.
Definitely. Thank you, Debbie. I'm really looking forward to it all.
Thank you. Thanks ever so much for listening to the latest episode of the Wednesday's Child podcast. If there's anything that Isabel has talked about today that you want to inquire about a little bit more, and my head is certainly sparked around a few more ideas that we might want to put forward for a follow-up episode or even an online event so we can have a Q&A with Isabel, then do let us know and we can pick up again on that in the future. And as I say, don't forget that Isabel is now a practitioner with us. And if you're already thinking, I need this woman to work with me, then by all means get in touch with us. Our usual email address is hello@wednesdayschild.co.uk. That's it for now. We'll look forward to seeing you again on another episode really soon. Thanks for listening. Take care and stay focused on recovery.